All right. I'm not sure what episode number this will be of Rockford Reading Daily. However, we are reading a essay from Thoreau, Henry Thoreau. The essay is entitled "On the Duty of Civil Disobedience." I'm going to read this in tandem with another member of the May 30th Alliance, and we'll do this still similarly to how we've done the previous episodes of Rockford Reading Daily, where we read for a certain amount of time, and then we take a pause and relate how the information in what we just read has connections to the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in Winnebago County, and how it relates to some of the issues that we're facing in general with the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. So I'm going to start off on the beginning of this, and we'll just run through it. On the duty of civil disobedience. I heartily accept the motto, quote, that government is best which governs least, end quote. And I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which I also believe, quote, that government is best which governs not at all, end quote. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weighty, and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, the government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute, which is their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people that can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, for, in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. This American government, what is it but a tradition, though a recent one, endeavoring to transmit itself unimpaired to posterity, but each instant losing some of its integrity. It has not the vitality and force of a single living man, for a single man can bend it to his will. It is a sort of a wooden gun to the people themselves, and if ever they should use it in earnest as a real one against each other, it will surely split. But it is not the less necessary for this. For the people must have some complicated machinery or other, and here is then to satisfy that idea of government which they have. Governments show thus how successfully men can be imposed on, even impose on themselves for their own advantage. It is excellent, we must allow. It is excellent, we must all allow. Yet this government never of itself furthered any enterprise, but by the alterity with which it got out of its way. It does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. The character inherent in the American people has done all that has been accomplished. And it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes got in the way. What up, brother? For government is an expedient by which men would fain succeed in letting one another alone. And, as has been said, when it is most expedient, the governed are most let alone by it. Trade and commerce, if they were not made of Indian rubber, would never manage to bounce over the obstacles which legislators are continually putting in their way. And, if one were to judge these men wholly by the effects of their actions, and not partly by their intentions, they would deserve to be classed and punished with those mischievous persons who put obstructions on the railroads. But, to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for, not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step toward obtaining it. What's up? Hold on, I'm in. What's up? How you doing? And so here we take a moment to pause here and reflect upon some of the things that was written in this first passage here I think one of the things that was pointed out was the fact that this was written in 1846. So I think that is something that's important to point out to give some type of understanding for the time period. I think that one of the other things that is important to point out in some of the things being read here is that Henry Thoreau is a white man living at this time. And so I think that the first overall theme of the passages that's written here is the desire for no government, but in the lieu of not being able to eradicate the government overnight, a desire for a better government. I think that one of the things that was important to reflect upon and point back out here is at the bottom of this first page, Yet this government never of itself furthered any enterprise, but by the alterity with which it got out of its way. It does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. The character inherent in the American people has done all that has been accomplished. I think that a lot of times that when people have conversations about the government or have conversations about institutions, one of the things that happens is people replace culture and morality with the standpoint of the belief of a country or with the ideology of a country. And so I think that a lot of times when you hear people talk about the government or you hear people talk about America and hold its governments in regards, a lot of times the things that they are holding in regard are things that individuals or collective of individuals have struggled to attain. And a lot of times they've struggled to attain those things not in conjunction with the government, but against the government. The government was it was the British government that was struggled against to create the country that we live in now. Once this country was created, it was the government that was struggled against to end slavery. It was the government that was struggled against to give black people voting rights, to try to give women voting rights. To this day, when people are struggling against specific issues that are prevalent in our society, a lot of times they are struggling against the government to try to change those things. But I'll pass this to somebody else to add on to some of those things.
And okay, I've got to find this quote. The character inherent in the American people has done all that has been accomplished, and it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes got in its way. There's a truth to that, but it's Thoreau, I think, lacks a perspective here that I see all over the place. That he sees the injustice of that is implicit with the state, but he isn't addressing the injustice that comes with his very presence in the land that he's occupying. We can have anarchism and abolish the state and abolish authority, but there's not going to be justice if we don't have restitution for the past injustices that we're still feeling, that people who are not privileged still have to feel the effects of. You know where we were? Right there, After all, the practical reason why, when the power is once in the hands of the people, a majority are permitted and for a long period continue to rule, is not because they are most likely to be in the right, nor because this seems fairest to the minority, but because they are physically the strongest. But a government in which the majority rule in all cases cannot be based on justice is even as far as men. But a government in which the majority rule in all cases cannot be based on justice, even as far as men understand it. Can there not be a government in which majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience, in which majorities decide only those questions to which the rule of expediency is applicable? Must the citizen ever for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why is every person a conscience then? I think there should be people first and subjects afterward. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. The only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right. It is truly enough said that a corporation has no conscience, but a corporation of conscientious people is a corporation with a conscience. Law never made people a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. A common and natural result of an undue respect for law is that you may see a file of soldiers, colonel, captain, corporal, privates, powder monkeys, and all, marching in admiral order over the hill and dale to the wars, against their wills, against their common sense and consciences, which make it very steep marching indeed, and produces a palpitation of the heart. They have no doubt that it is a damnable business in which they are concerned. They are all peaceably inclined. Now what are they, people at all, or small movable forts and magazines at the service of unscrupulous people in power? Visit the Navy Yard and behold a Marine. Such a man as an American government can make, or such as it can make a person with its black arts. A mere shadow and reminiscence of humanity, a person laid out alive and standing, and already, as one may say, buried under arms with funeral accompaniments, though it may be, quote, not a drum was heard, nor a funeral note. As his course to the ramparts were hurried, not a soldier discharged his farewell shot, over the grave where our hero we buried, unquote. The mass of men serve the state thus, not as people mainly, but as machines with their bodies. They are the standing army and the militia, jailers, constables, posse comitatus, etc. In most cases, there is no free exercise of the judgment or of the moral sense, but they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones. And wooden people can perhaps be manufactured that will serve the purpose as well. Such command no more respect than people of straw or a lump of dirt. They have the same sort of worth only as horses and dogs. Yet such as these even are commonly esteemed good citizens. Others, as most legislators, politicians, lawyers, ministers, and office holders, serve the state chiefly with their heads, and as they rarely make any moral distinctions, they are as likely to serve the devil without intending it as God. A very few as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense, and people serve the state with their consciences also, and so necessarily resist it for the most part, and they are commonly treated by it as enemies. A wise person will only be useful as a person, and will not submit to be clay and stop a hole to keep the wind away, but leave that office to his dust at least. Quote, I am too high born to be propertied, to be a secondary at control or useful serving person and instrument to any sovereign state throughout the world. Unquote. They who gives themselves entirely to their fellow people appears to them useless and selfish, but they who gives themselves partially to them is pronounced a benefactor and philanthropist. How does it become a person to behave towards this American government today? I answered that they cannot without disgrace be associated with it. I cannot for an instant recognize that political organization is my government, which is the slave's government also.
All right, here, and then let's reflect upon the pieces that we just read there. I think that the first thing that stands out to me is the specification of the differences between people who blindly are instruments of the government and people who, I guess, more enlightenedly fight against some of the ideology of the government or some of the ideology of governmental agencies. And I think that that's something that's been prevalent throughout society, not just in America, but in general in a lot of places where there are certain times where people just and I think that that's something that sort of relates to police currently, but just in general in society there are certain times where certain certain jobs or certain career paths are something that are just accepted as things to do, whether it's because it provides honor, whether it's because it provides a paycheck, whether it's because it provides a boost in class, and those things are primary, and the actions that you take as part of that construct become secondary. And so there are people who, because they're in the military or because they're in the Army or the Navy, they're looked at as being in a prestigious position, and they're looked at as being successful. And it is secondary what they do when they are deployed in other countries, or what they do when wartime comes about, or why they are enacting war in some of these places. And I think that same thing is said for police officers. There are a lot of people who are deemed to be in positions of high esteem because they're a police sergeant or because they're a police captain or a chief of police. And those things come primary, and secondary is the traumas that the institution that they work for, that they have upon people. Secondary is the damage that they do to families and to communities as police officers. And I think that that type of mind state and that type of mindset feeds into the maintaining the status quo that the government and that the institutions like policing all exist to maintain. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do is begin to question people who are used as pawns or used as instruments to maintain the status quo or to further the status quo. Here, did you have?
I'd like to throw in another example with that, and I'd like to talk about judges. Judges are often seen as people who are it takes education to get to these spots, and people see that as the primary, and their actions are secondary to that. These just implicit with the position that the role they play in society, they are delivering injustice daily.
That's it. Okay, here, let's move on to this next passage here. About at 18 minutes, 19 minutes. All men recognize the right of revolution. That is, the right to refuse allegiance to and to resist the government when its tyranny or its inefficiency are great and unendurable. But almost all say that such is not the case now. But such was the case, they think, in the Revolution of 75. If one were to tell me that this was a bad government because it taxed certain foreign commodities brought to its ports, it is most probable that I should not make an ado about it, for I can do without them. 1 second. One second. All right, my fault. Lost my spot. All right. All machines have their friction, and possibly this does enough good to counterbalance the evil. At any rate, it is a great evil to make a stir about it. But when the friction comes to have its machine, and oppression and robbery are organized, I say, let us not have such a machine any longer. In other words, when a sixth of the population of a nation which is undertaken to be the refuge of liberty are slaves, and the whole country is unjustly overrun and conquered by a foreign army and subjected to military law, I think that it is not too soon for honest men to rebel and revolutionize. What makes this duty the more urgent is the fact that the country so overrun is not our own, but ours is the invading army. Paley, a common authority with many on moral questions, in his chapter on the, quote, duty of submission to civil government, end quote, resolves all civil obligation into expediency. And he proceeds to say, quote, that so long as the interest of the whole society requires it, that is, so long as the established government cannot be resisted or changed without public inconveniency, it is the will of God that the established government be obeyed and no longer, end quote. This principle being admitted, the justice of every particular case of resistance is reduced to a computation of the quantity of the danger and grievance on the one side and of the probability and expense of redressing it on the other, end quote. Of this he says, every man shall judge for himself. But Paley appears never to have contemplated those cases to which the rule of expediency does not apply, in which a people, as well as an individual, must do justice, cost what it may. If I have unjustly wrestled a plank from a drowning man, I must restore it to him though I drown myself. This, according to Paley, would be inconvenient. But he that would save his life in such a case shall lose it. This people must cease to hold slaves and to make war on Mexico, though it cost them their existence as a people. In their practice, nations agree with Paley. But does anyone think that Massachusetts does exactly what is right at the present crisis? Quote, a drab of state, a cloth of silver slut, to have her train borne up and her soul trail die in the dirt, end quote. Practically speaking, the opponents to a reform in Massachusetts are not 100,000 politicians at the South, but 100,000 merchants and farmers here who are more interested in commerce and agriculture than they are in humanity and are not prepared to do justice to the slave and to Mexico, cost what it may. I quarrel not with far-off foes, but with those who, near at home, cooperate with and do the bidding of those far away, and without whom the latter would be harmless. We are accustomed to say that the mass of men are unprepared, but improvement is slow because the few are not materially wiser or better than the many. It is not so important that many should be as good as you, as that there be some absolute goodness somewhere, for that would leave the whole lump. There are thousands who are in opinion opposed to slavery and to the war, who yet in effect do nothing to put an end to them, who, esteeming themselves children of Washington and Franklin, sit down with their hands in their pockets and say that they know not what to do and do nothing, who even postpone the question of freedom to the question of free trade and quietly read the prices current along with the latest advices from Mexico after dinner and, it may be, fall asleep over them both. What is the price current of an honest man and patriot today? They hesitate, and they regret, and sometimes they petition, but they do nothing in earnest and with effect. They will wait, well disposed, for others to remedy the evil that they may no longer have it to regret. At most, they give only a cheap vote and a feeble countenance and Godspeed to the right as it goes by them. There are 999 patrons of virtue to one virtuous man, but it is easier to deal with the real possessor of a thing than with the temporary guardian of it. And then we'll take a moment to stop and reflect there, and then we probably end this episode at that portion right there. That'll get us about to the 30-minute mark. I think that, as usual with most writings and most of the things that we read here, each writer sort of has their own cadence, and it takes a little bit of time to dissect the way that they're presenting their philosophies or presenting their information, and the case is true is here with Thoreau as well. I think that in totality from these first passages, the thing that stands out to me the most is the concept of, or the idea, I guess, of not necessarily measuring your ideology or your philosophy based on the time that you are in, because as we know, if you go back 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, there are certain evils or certain issues that during that time it was not maybe acceptable, or it was not normal to be against. There are a lot of people who are known as American heroes who during the time of slavery were not struggling against slavery. There are a lot of people who are known as American heroes who at the time when women didn't have the right to vote weren't struggling for women to have the right to vote, because it was not an issue that was prevalent at that time to be on a certain side of. And I think that that's where the concept of being on the right side of history comes into play at. And I think that Thoreau positions himself to be on the right side of history throughout this essay, when he doesn't only oppose the type of issues in the government that are disenfranchising him, or he doesn't only oppose the type of issues in the government that may be dissatisfactory to him personally, but he also opposes the things that are dissatisfactory to slaves. He also he's against the things that are dissatisfactory to the indigenous people in Mexico, even though those things may not necessarily be causing his life to be more traumatic or his life to be more difficult. He understands the concept of each one of us being intertwined with the other one. The idea that I can't be the best version of me until you are able to be the best version of yourself. And so I think that comes into play heavily in the readings in the essay that we have here. And so when he begins to speak about the issues of slavery, when he begins to speak about the issues surrounding the Mexican War, he positions himself to be on the right side of history with those things. I think that's something that we also have to have a mindset of in 2021, that right now in this current moment, it may not be the mainstream thought to be a abolitionist, to be a police abolitionist or a prison abolitionist. But what is important for us to keep in context is the scope of history. And on the scope of history, throughout time, we have become less barbaric of people. We have become less of an inhumane people. And so if you are positioning yourself to be on the side of things of inhumanity or continuing things of inhumanity, continuing things of barbarism, I believe that you position yourself to be on the wrong side of history. I also think that one of the things that I want to point out that is important in here is how Thoreau speaks about the importance of taking some type of action around these things and not simply prognosticating. And I also thought it was important the contrast that he made to how many people felt that during the times of the American Revolution that the issues that were being presented were worth a sacrifice for, and how comparatively as slavery continued to persist and as the Mexican War was continuing to persist, people didn't view those issues as things that were that rose to the level of causing a revolution or needing a revolution about. And again, I think that just comes back into understanding that for most people, if it is not directly inconveniencing their life, they're comfortable with maintaining the status quo that exists around a certain issue. And that is something that is how you position yourself to be, in my opinion, on the wrong side of history, when you're only taking into account present inconvenience and present injustice. Here, and then I'll pass this to somebody else.
The example about restoring the plank to the person you stole it from earlier that Thoreau made makes me want to refer back to an idea I was trying to emphasize earlier, and that Thoreau lacks, I would call it an anti-imperialist perspective here, and that he wants to take these measures for justice, and he's right in doing that. But these things, to have justice, we need to take these things further. Where his people, my people, we invaded this land, and decolonization has to be part of the restitution here.
All right. And then that brings us to about the 30-minute mark. So we'll wrap this episode up here. Want to encourage people to go back and listen to previous episodes of Rockford Reading Daily. We first started reading Have Black Lives Ever Mattered by Mumia Abu-Jamal. Second book that we read was Race Matters by Cornel West. And then the third book we read was Citizens, Cops, and Power. And I can't remember the name of the author of that one. But this will be the fourth piece of writing that fourth piece of literature that we have gotten into. And so I do want to encourage people to go back and listen to those previous ones. We want to sort of use all of these different writings to build a big picture of the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, and ways to struggle against those issues, and also different ideologies and philosophies that people have had around struggling against injustices in general. And so share this on whatever platform you're listening to it on. Be on the lookout for the next episode of Rockford Reading Daily coming out tomorrow. And again, we record and put these episodes out on a daily basis to give everybody an opportunity to either begin or further their struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. All right, we outside.